My name's Abby Rigney. I'm the assistant principal at Overlook Middle School. I'm part of the Public Safety Roundtable in the Ash West District. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We're really excited about our presentation. There's a couple people I want to make sure we thank before we get started. The Ash West Foundation of Excellence, particularly Chris Wells, were generous enough to fund tonight's presentation, so we appreciate your support. Every time as a school we reach out to them, they support us in basically everything we do, so we're really grateful for that. Chris Bagosh and the Public Safety Roundtable in supporting this presentation. We've been working on this for quite a while, so I appreciate her leadership. Our SROs, our resource officers in the district from Ashburnham and Westminster, who are also so supportive and work so closely with the school. The Worcester County DA and Learn to Cope, who came here tonight and gave us their time and set up the resources and the tables that you saw as you walked in. And then to Dr. Potee and her commitment to her education on this really important issue and the topic of addiction. We appreciate everything that you do, and we're so happy you're here. So enjoy. Thank you.
I just want to thank Abby for recruiting me out here. She asked me to speak a long time ago, and you guys are my first ever talk to this new school year. So this is where I grew up, not exactly in Ashburnham, but I grew up in North Quabbin. So Route 2 and Gardner and Leominster, these are my very known territory, so it's really great to actually be here. So this slide deck is available to anybody who wants it. It's on, I have a website, I'll show you a slide at the end that talks about that, but if you want the specific slide deck, the school has it, they're videotaping this. Anybody who wants it, you could take this, you can go give this talk yourself tomorrow as far as I'm concerned. Anybody who wants to go out and talk on addiction and spread knowledge about it, there's no one who would be more enthusiastic than I would on you going out and speaking tomorrow. So take the slide deck, you don't need to credit me, just spread the word that we are dealing with a problem that is often unspoken in our communities and our society, and specifically unspoken during medical training. And most of your primary care doctors know nothing about this subject. It's a real problem. So we're going to be very big picture for almost the entire talk. I get into the swamp sometimes, but really very big picture. You'll know when I'm into the marijuana swamp because we're going to spend some time on weed tonight, whether you wanted to or not. We're headed there. We're going to talk about brain and how it develops. We're going to talk about the reward circuit of the brain, which has 3 specific areas that tend to interact, and those are the nucleus accumbens, the prefrontal cortex, and the ventral tegmental area. This is the reward circuit that tells you to survive every day. It tells you to get up out of bed and find food and find water and spread your genetic material forward. Because none of us thought about ourselves that way today, but in terms of evolution, your entire purpose on this planet is to survive long enough that you send your genetic material forward. Your job here is to mate, right? And so I gave this talk a couple years ago, and there was a husband in the talk, and the wife had to stay home and take care of the kids, and the next day she told me, she asked her husband what he got out of the talk. And the only thing he heard was, your job today is to mate. That was it. Then he just turned right off, and the talk was over for him. So this is the part of the brain that says to you, I will reward you if you find good water and good food, and you have an orgasm and maybe get pregnant, because that is your purpose, right? So it's the eat, drink, have sex, and the problem is, it is also the part of the brain that is disrupted with all addictive substances, because I'm going to talk you through why that looks that way. So it is the most ancient part of the brain. Every mammal, every sentient being has this part of the brain. We're going to spend time on dopamine. I spend no time on serotonin, which is one of the many of the other neurotransmitters in the brain. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter in the brain that gives you this strong sense of euphoria and joy, and holy smokes, that was awesome. I need to repeat that behavior. 2 behaviors associated with dopamine are perseveration and compulsion. And if you pause for a minute and think about your great-great-great-great-grandfather, so whatever, 150 years ago, you are grateful that he was both compulsive and a perseverator. And that is the reason that we all get to exist, as our ancestors were really good at surviving. And having those 2 skills of going to bed at night and thinking to yourself, oh my God, how am I going to feed my brood tomorrow? Having it be the last thing you thought of before you went to bed and the first thing you thought of when you got up in the morning, that's how they survived. This entire front row, ago, they were terrible at it, right? They don't get to be with us today because their ancestors sucked at those really helpful behaviors of compulsion and perseveration. Take those two behaviors, though, and apply them to addictive substances or behaviors. And who in this room is a nurse or a clinician, a doctor, a PA? So you guys take care of people in the hospital, in the ER, where you're like, seriously, my friend, I have seen you 6 times for alcohol use in the last month, right? You get kind of mad. You get sort of fed up. But if you pause and remind yourself, they are just exhibiting the behaviors of compulsion and perseveration. They cannot help themselves. They are compelled to do that. They cannot stop thinking about it. This part of the brain, this is normal behavior. As frustrating as it is to take care of. It used to have great evolutionary benefit. When it comes to addiction, it's not very beneficial. So I make an argument that at a baseline, we have a certain unit number of dopamine in our body. There's no way to measure this. You're not going to call your family doctor tomorrow and ask for your dopamine levels. But some of us are happy-go-lucky, silver lining, golden retriever people with high dopamine. We sit at 105 or 106 every day. We feel awesome, right? We're the glass half fulls. There's a lot of us who look a lot like this, though. We're sort of the low dopamine, dysthymic, sitting at a dopamine level of 85. And you guys know these people, right? You have them in your family. I have them in my family. These people come to the doctor a lot. I spent my day with this, right? Because they're the ones who just feel badly much of the day, and they come to see a primary care doctor a lot. So I make an argument that at a baseline, on average in this room, we have about 100 units of dopamine in our brain right now. And when you find that perfect food, and all of us have a different perfect food, but for me, you know, that lovely June Western Mass strawberry, when you've been eating those horrible things from California for months, and then you taste that first strawberry and think, oh yeah, I forgot. That's a strawberry, right? It has 27 flavors. It smells like I thought a strawberry should smell. You get a spike in your dopamine, and your dopamine will spike to about 150, and then it will go back to normal. You have sex, it's consensual, you have an orgasm, your dopamine spikes to 200, and then it goes back to normal. Those are two behaviors associated with surviving throughout the 200,000 years that we have been on this planet. A spike in dopamine, and then it goes back to normal. It tells your brain, continue that behavior, it is good, it will help you survive. You use a drug like cocaine and your dopamine will spike to 350. You use a drug like a prescribed opiate or a really strong street opiate like heroin or fentanyl, carfentanil, your dopamine will spike between 500, 900, 1,000. And you use a drug like crystal methamphetamine and your dopamine will go to about 1,300. So what's amazing is that most of us don't wake up every day and like shoot some dope or find some crystal meth, because who wouldn't want a dopamine of 1,000 or 1,300? It seems like an awesome idea, right? I mean, that's whatever, 6 times, 7 times a great orgasm. I'm in on that plan. I'm not exactly in on that plan because I take care of people on the other end who've been in this fairly deeply, and we're going to talk about why it is that exposing your brain to addictive substances over time breaks down the brain function. So let's talk about 2 drugs and how they work in the brain, okay? There's 3 things that impact the amount of dopamine in your brain. How much dopamine is produced, how many dopamine receptors are sitting on the other side collecting the information, and how many little reuptake transporters, or little vacuums there are sucking the dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. Those are the 3 things that impact how much dopamine are in your brain. And the way cocaine works is it turns off the vacuum. It shuts down all the vacuums, and so when the vacuums are shut down, the dopamine stays in the synaptic cleft, and that's how you get to a dopamine of 350. That's the drug with the most clear-cut pathway. The way that heroin works is it actually works through an opiate mu receptor, and it turns on the GABA system, and at the end of the day, heroin produces more dopamine. It does it through a slightly more complicated pathway, but we could do this with every drug, and in fact, you can eventually do it with every addictive behavior. It somehow is impacting the system. Now, I've had people say, explain to me the pathway of video game addiction, and I'm like, I have absolutely no clue what that pathway is. It's complicated, but at the end of the day, it ends up somewhere here. So when I told you that you eat that June strawberry and your dopamine goes back to normal, and you have sex and your dopamine goes back to normal, the problem with the brain is that when it sees dopamine levels of 300, 500, 900, 1,300, it says, holy smoke, something's wrong, because that doesn't fit with anything any normal, evolved human brain has ever seen. And the brain says, this is not okay. I'm getting these huge spikes in dopamine. I need to turn down my volume. I need to down-regulate. So what is it going to do? It's going to stop producing dopamine. It's going to erase 80% of the dopamine receptors, and it's going to turn on every vacuum in sight. It is the brain's normalization of being exposed to these spiking levels of dopamine. So people who develop a problem with drugs are returning to the drug again and again because they're often chasing that first high. The brain's response is to stop making dopamine altogether or make it at very low levels. So they never return to their 100 units after a few weeks, a few months in. Their new baseline dopamine is sitting at 45, right, 50. You wake up in the morning, it is hard to get out of bed, it is hard to shower, it is hard to be nice to anybody on the planet, it is hard to do anything other than think to yourself, what can I do to feel better than this? Because this feels terrible. Having a dopamine level that low is not consistent with living a normal, healthy life at all. And people will continue to drink, to use drugs, to chase drugs, because they know they don't get high anymore. They're chasing normal now, right? If they can get themselves back up to a dopamine of 85, they've had a pretty good day. So the concept that I need you guys to understand is that this is not different than any other disease in our body. It affects an organ. In this case, the organ is your brain. It disrupts transporter systems the same way that diabetes interrupts transporter systems coming out of the pancreas in terms of insulin and glucose receptors. Every disease pathway in your body will look a lot like this. So for people who say, look, these people are weak-willed, they're babies, they just have to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get over it, that's never my attitude on this. I think there's lots of ways to get better. I'm not all about the drugs. I think drugs can be an important part of getting better, treatment of some sort, but you have to acknowledge once you sit and study this stuff that the brain has become incredibly disrupted with addiction. So I want to talk about Haywood Hospital, which is actually, I'm very loyal to Haywood Hospital. I think they're a great hospital. I think they're really well run. They took over my little Athol Memorial Hospital many years ago, and I think they've done an awesome job there. But I can guarantee you, even at our great little Haywood Hospital, or I could say Leominster or UMass, the following likely happened this week or today. So this guy is a 67-year-old guy from Ashburnham, and he's having crushing substernal chest pain. And his wife is like, I think we should call 911. And he's like, no, really, I'm good. And she's like, no, we're calling 911. And 911 ends up in this guy's living room. He's looking ashen, a little blue around the lips, and they look at him and think, you're really sick. They give him some oxygen, they give him a sublingual nitroglycerin and an aspirin, they put it in IV. They actually transmit an EKG on him straight from that living room. Initially, it's probably going to go to Haywood. Haywood's going to look at that EKG and say, bypass us, don't come here. He needs to go to UMass. This guy needs, quadruple bypass yesterday. So this guy actually shows up at UMass Memorial, and this guy is sent straight to the cath lab. Forget the cath lab. They sent him straight to the cardiac care OR. He does have quintuple bypass. Then he goes to the cardiac care unit for 5 days, and then he's on the floor for another 7 to 10 days. And he has now a new cardiologist. He has a new social work consult and a psychiatrist because he's going to get depressed because he's a 67-year-old guy with a heart attack. He goes to cardiac rehab for 12 weeks following that. He gets to see me, his primary care doctor, for the first time in 4 years. He got great medical care. His next door neighbor is that 24-year-old young woman who has a known opiate use disorder that her mom at least knows about, and her mom holds Narcan in her possession because she's so terrified of her daughter dying. So one morning, that same morning, she knocks on the bathroom door, and the door is locked and there's no response, and that mom completely freaks out and kicks the door in and finds her daughter lying on the ground, not breathing, and blue. She calls 911 first and then administers the first dose of Narcan. Her daughter doesn't respond at all. In this town, the police carry Narcan. Am I hearing a nod? Am I seeing a nod? Yes, right? Okay, you're so far away. I'm glad you gave me my thumbs up, though. But yeah, the police carry Narcan. All emergency medical workers do. In this town, who's likely to show up first? In my town, the police are on my doorstep in a second, from what I can tell. So those guys haul in there. It takes 4 more doses of Narcan before she comes alive. They ship her off to Haywood, and what's offered to her at Haywood? Possibly nothing. Possibly observation, yeah. Ginger ale, yeah, it sounds pretty bad. There's no beds available to you, right? Actually, you're not actively suicidal. Are you active? Was that an active suicide attempt? She's like, no, I just got a bad batch. So having a bad batch and nearly dying that morning doesn't buy you an inpatient psych bed. You have to be actively suicidal. I am going to say something. Haywood Hospital, during most hours of the day, and somebody correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, they would probably have a recovery coach come see her, which is actually ahead of many other hospitals in Massachusetts. Because Haywood recognizes this is a problem, a lot of their clinicians can acknowledge this, and they actually are trying to do a little something, right? But what I want to tell you is about my 67-year-old man up there, because I didn't tell you his full story. He's a type 2 diabetic, and he has uncontrolled high blood pressure. How do I know that? Because I'm his primary care doctor, and I really haven't seen him in 4 years, which means he hasn't gotten any of his meds filled with me. He smokes 2 packs a day of cigarettes. He kicks back a 12-pack of beer every day, and he goes to McDonald's, unbeknownst to his wife, 4 times a week at lunch. Did this guy create his heart attack? 100% he did. He just did. He created his own heart attack, right? He did it by having poor, unhealthy lifestyle choices. And what's this guy addicted to? Nicotine. He's definitely addicted to nicotine. Probably alcohol. Yeah, he seems like a 12-pack a day. That's a lot of alcohol. Likely addicted to fat, probably sugar, right? I mean, he's not living a healthy life. But when EMS rolled into that living room and when he showed up at UMass ER, did anybody wag their finger and say, you know what, my friend, you actually created your problem here? How much money did we just spend on that guy? Hundreds of thousands, $250,000. That's probably what we just spent on that guy in that span of time. And nobody wagged their finger at him and said, you know what, you actually created this hot mess that you've gotten yourself into. And I actually think I'm not going to provide medical care for you today. Because you're a weak-willed guy who needs to pull himself up by a bootstrap and not have heart attacks. So I'm going to stop providing care. You know what I am? I'm a primary care doctor. All day long, I take care of people who are not making the healthiest decisions about their lives. Who in this room is a vegan and a marathon runner? Anybody? Do I have that perfect human being in this room, whoever that person is? Yeah. No, right? Who in this room has tried to make a change in their health care, whatever it is, bring your, cholesterol down on your own, lower your blood sugar, lose 10 pounds? Who's tried to lose 10 pounds and found it really hard? Right? Wicked hard. Because sometimes it's really, really hard to change. It's really hard to change behaviors. It's really hard to get well. But we pick and choose what we're going to treat in this country. And this is the reason I do this work, is I am so outraged by the disparate medical care given to people, those who suffer with both mental illness or addiction. It's unacceptable. That's the reason I do this work on a given night. And if you guys are going to go out and advocate for anything, it's this kind of change. Like, make it equal, make it fair. If you want to start denying coverage to everybody who's made a bad decision in their life, you know what? The medical system in this country would be really cheap, right? We wouldn't provide medical care to anybody. That would be really a great plan, I guess. Okay, so let's talk about the dopamine receptors in the brain, drug by drug. So that top one is cocaine, and that first column in the middle is a healthy brain. And what you see, all those orange areas, that's healthy dopamine. The right brain is a brain that's become addicted. So that top brain is cocaine. You definitely don't see much dopamine there. The next one down is crystal meth. That's a really unhealthy looking brain. The third one down is alcohol, and the final one is heroin. So you can see a distinct difference in dopamine in those two brains. I want to point out alcohol to you, the third one down, furthest one over. You can still see dopamine happening there. And for me, we're going to dive in on alcohol in a few minutes, but the wheels come off the bus on the alcohol use problem pretty late in the game. There are a lot of us who are functional alcoholics, right? We manage to sort of take care of our kids, and we show up at field hockey games, and we continue to work, even though we actually really have developed a problem. And people never, ever walk into my office and say, hey, doc, I have a problem with alcohol. I need you to help me, right? They get hauled there. They get hauled there by a partner who loves them. They get hauled there because they have their second OUI. They get hauled there because they just lost their job. So people, 13% of us in this country are struggling with an alcohol use disorder. That is much higher than type 2 diabetes. Yet again, what primary care doctors know about recognizing and treating alcohol use disorder is really, really low. So there are 3 things that are going to predispose you as a human being, but more importantly, your kids to addiction. And this is where we're going to spend our time tonight. We're going to talk about how it is that addiction starts and what we can do to help prevent it. So the first one is genetics. The second is early exposure while the brain is developing. The third one is a history of childhood trauma. So mental health is part of this, but having poor mental health in general doesn't mean you're going to be an addict. There are lots of us who have depression or anxiety or bipolar disease or schizophrenia, and we're not addicted to things. So just because you have poor mental health doesn't mean you will become addicted to something. But poor mental health becomes a subcomponent of everybody else. So when you're 15 and you're really anxious, and the only way you feel like you can fit into a party is by drinking, you're treating your anxiety with alcohol, but really what you are is a 15-year-old who's exposing a developing brain to alcohol. So the mental illness becomes part of the early use, right? Having a terrible traumatic childhood causes a lot of mental health problems, but it wasn't that mental health then created the addiction. So it's related, but not causal, I would say. So there are very few diseases that are as genetic as addiction. People, when I say, tell me a little bit about your family history, people will tell me, and they'll tell me what they think is genetically relevant, most of which is not relevant. They'll tell me about some distant cancers. They'll tell me about heart disease, and every time they do, I say, just stop for a minute. Did your dad smoke? And they're like, oh, he smoked like a chimney. I'm like, done. Like, your dad's heart disease was really caused by tobacco, which is the leading cause of death in this country, right? Because tobacco causes heart disease. So it's not all that genetic, quite honestly. Having a really, really healthy lifestyle can often offset many genetics. Addiction, that is not true for, because the genetics of addiction are so powerful. So if you have a parent or a grandparent struggling with addiction, you have about a 50% chance of having addiction yourself. So who needs to hear that? The kids. Your kids need to understand their genetic risk for addiction. And I did this with my kids. And I always think I freak all the parents out when I say those words. But your kids don't get to change their genetics. They get what they get, right? They have no impact on that. They need to understand that they are at higher risk, if they are at higher risk of addiction in their family, because they get to control the next one 100%. And if they control the next one well, they can almost entirely erase the genetic predisposition, which means we're giving them something they get to control. So I sat down with my kids, and I didn't go into the gory details of who and how much and when and why. I just said, look, our family's at very high risk of developing an addiction problem. And it means that you guys have to make very good choices in the next 10 years while your brains are developing to try to avoid that. Because what we know is that all addiction is a developmental pediatric disease. All addiction starts in the beginning while people's brains are under development. Now, people hear this slide and they sort of think, nobody ever told me that. My pediatrician didn't talk to me about that. That doesn't seem right. But I just want you to pause for a minute and ask yourself, whether you're somebody who's in recovery or you have people in your life who are in recovery, ask yourself the question, how old were you or the others when you started cigarettes, alcohol, or marijuana, right? And the normal answer that I will get in my day-to-day work of taking care of people with addiction is I was 12, 13, or 14. With one of those things, right? The three easy ones is how I think of them. Sometimes, so I've done this talk in front of inmates at the jail, 120 guys, because I work as the medical director at an all-male jail. And in that room, I'll say, how old were people when they started using alcohol, nicotine, or marijuana? And I'll start at 12. Every hand in the air is in the air at 12. Every hand. And then I start going backwards, 11, 10, 9, 8, and I'm feeling sick, right? I get to 8, I start to get sick. 7, 6. I have hands in the air at the age of 6, starting their first drink or cigarettes, right? How is that possible? But it is possible. You grow up with somebody who's a bad drinker, they're passed out in a chair like at 7 at night, right? They have their handle of vodka next to them and their vomit bucket on the other side. You think that 6-year-old's not paying attention? We all grew up in an era where parents smoked a lot, right? Who had parents who smoked? Right, there was a glass ashtray out in your house with a lit cigarette in it. Remember that? You think those kids weren't just picking up and taking a drag? It happened. Lots of us still smoke. Lots of us still struggle, although most of us smoke outside now. Like, it's become less common to have that lit cigarette in an ashtray. That's a good thing. So if we can get those kids with a strong genetic predisposition to addiction to postpone their use of all addictive substances till their age of 21 or 22, the studies show that you almost entirely erase the genetics. So the message I send to my kids, my personal 3 children at home, and the kids I take care of in my practice, is you can't be the 17-year-old who's smoking weed with your friends. You can't be the 17-year-old who goes to an after-football party and drinks a ton of beer in the basement. You need to be the kid that has practice in your head 10 different lines of, I'm not interested, I want to protect my brain. I'm not interested, I'm an athlete. I'm just not into that stuff. It's not who I am. Done. Walk away. Because you are so susceptible to the disease of addiction that the only thing you can control is when your brain is first exposed to an addictive substance. So when you take a 15-year-old kid and they start drinking alcohol, and alcohol here is defined as 2 alcoholic beverages a week. 40% of those kids, of these 15-year-olds, become alcoholics. If you wait till age 21, 7% develop an alcohol use disorder. That is a huge difference between those two ages in terms of brain development. Okay, let's talk about our kids, because you know the truth is, do I have students in the room, sort of in the back, maybe over there, a couple kids? I'm really glad you guys are here. I always wish the whole room were filled with students and parents, because I actually love when I have students in the room. It makes me very happy, because the truth is our students are making the best decisions around substances that we have ever seen in any generation, and they're doing a heck of a lot better than everybody else in our generation did. I went to high school at Mahar in Orange. I graduated in '86, and I tell you, we were up to no good, right? Statistically speaking, our kids are making awesome decisions. What we see the lowest rates of is cigarette smoking. You ask a 15-year-old if they smoke cigarettes, and they're disgusted by you. They're like, of course I don't smoke cigarettes, right? Cigarettes cause cancer. They cause everything. Like, you think that message hasn't gotten through? Are we down to 0% smoking yet? No, but we're getting closer and closer. The rates of high school seniors smoking cigarettes is like 6% right now. It's unbelievably low. The problem is, as the sense of harm from cigarettes has gone up, the use has gone down, but as the sense of harm from marijuana has gone down, marijuana use has gone up. So let's talk about exactly how the brain is developing during adolescence. Between the ages of 12 and 24, really critical things are happening. So one of the things that's happening is something called synaptic refinement. You have tens of billions of connections in your brain, and not only do you not need that many connections in your brain, the ages of 12 and 24 is this critical period of time where you have to prune them back. And if you don't prune them back, you end up with a really unhealthy, non-functioning, majorly psychiatrically ill brain. This age, their job is to clip back unuseful synapses and hold on to the ones that are important. So it's very easy to get disrupted. The second thing that happens is called myelination, which is when you are insulating rapid, efficient pathways. You're getting rid of the dusty roads you no longer need, and you're holding onto the good pathways. So our teenage brain, so who's a parent or grandparent of a teenager in the room? Practically the entire room, right? How fun is it? It's fun some days, not so fun other days. But our teenage brains are actually awesome, even though they're really hard to parent. Because these brains need to be pushing the envelope all the time. Their job is to figure out what needs to stay and what needs to go. And you have to be a little bit crazy and a little bit emotional to make that work. I have a 15-year-old daughter. I tell you, she's laughing and telling me she loves me, and 28 seconds later, she's screaming at me and crying. And honest to God, I think I said nothing in that 28 seconds, right? So I don't know who else has that going on at their house, but it's not so easy. But guess what? The emotional valence, the spectrum of emotions when you're a teenager is intentionally incredibly wide. These are brains that have less than optimal planning, less consideration for negative consequences, more risky, impulsive behavior, act first, think later. There's never a time in your life when you are more influenced by your peers, ever. And I want you to pause on that one. Think about you or your kids when they were 8. And some 9-year-old said, hey, wouldn't it be fun to go push that kid off the swing, or something that wasn't fun, it was just mean. An 8-year-old would actually say, yeah, that's not such a good idea. I'm going to go tell the teacher. And when you were 28 and one of your friends said, let's go do this wicked, stupid thing, you were like, I'm 28 years old, that's stupid, of course I'm not going to do that, and you walked away. But when you're 15 or 14 or 18 and somebody says, let's go do this, you're like, yeah, I'm in, right? I'm in. Because that's your instinct. You're finding your herd. The teenage years are about peers, and that's all that matters. Your family, your parents don't matter that much. In fact, their job is to separate from you at this age. But these brains are intentionally amazing, doing this amazing, really frustrating from a parent perspective work, because they're trying to figure out what needs to get pruned, what next needs to get myelinated. So there's a third thing that happens during this phase, and that is that the brain is laying down all these receptors. Specifically, it lays down dopamine receptors in the final outer cortex of the brain. We've already covered how dopamine gets disrupted with addiction, right? So this is why all addiction starts during the teenage years, is because this is when dopamine gets laid down in the final cortex. The other receptor that gets laid down is a natural neuroendocannabinoid called anandamide. And we think anandamide's job is to help figure out what gets pruned back. The problem with anandamide is it's a mirror image to THC, which is the psychoactive cannabinoid in marijuana. So here I have this critical transmitter in my brain whose job it is to help figure out what's coming and what's staying and what's going, and it looks just the same way as THC. And the problem with THC is it's a little bit of a bully, and it actually knocks the naturally occurring anandamide out of the way and attaches itself. So for people in this room who are like, marijuana's all good, it's all natural, I'm all in, whatever, it's fine. For you adults over the age of 25, I actually don't care what you do with marijuana. I don't want you operating on my knee. I don't want you on the roads tonight, and neither do our uniformed officers. I don't want you changing the lug nuts on my tire. But what you do with marijuana in the privacy of your own home over the age of 25, I don't care, right? I'm saying that from a medical perspective. But under the age of 25, man, I care about marijuana. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to hate me on my marijuana stuff because you're going to be sick of me, but I need you to understand this stuff. So when we look at teenagers exposed to marijuana, we have a very specific change in attention, verbal learning, memory, processing speed, and that continues even when they're not high. When you look at the data on people who use between the ages of 15 and 21, marijuana more than 400 times, and that may seem like a lot, but I want to be clear, our kids who are using marijuana are often using it every day. I have kids I take care of in my practice who wake up, they take a hit of marijuana. And the bathroom at 11 o'clock at school, they're taking a hit of marijuana. They're taking another hit at 2:30 when they get home. They take it just to sit down with their parents at dinner, and then they use it to sleep or something at night. So I just got 6 hits in a day, right? It does not take much to get to 400 uses of marijuana in a 6-year span of time. So when you look at people using marijuana 400 times or more, the likelihood of having gained a university degree by age 25 is 2%. When you compare that to people who aren't using marijuana during their teenage years, they have a university degree about 36% by age 25. When you look at unemployed by age 25, that number says, does that say 52%? Is that red line? Okay, compared to 21% of not using. And you look at welfare dependent in the early 20s, 57% compared to 25. This, for me, represents kids who are not launching out my door, right? This represents my youngest kid sleeping in my basement playing video games and smoking pot. Not okay with me. We all want our kids to thrive. We love them. We want them to leave our house eventually. We want them to have jobs and give back to society and take care of pets, right? This, for me, is a failed generation that has couch lock, right? And all they know to do is sit on the couch and watch Games of Thrones. That's not a success. So I am actually quite anxious about this next phase that we've entered into as Massachusetts and as a country. So I'm going to skip this. I'm just going to say that this study I'm showing you is mainly out of New Zealand. Some of the stuff comes from Australia. But it's actually a measured 8-point loss in IQ by the age of 35. The problem with all the data I just showed you is it's based on the old marijuana, where THC levels in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s was sitting at about 1.5 to 3%. Then the stuff gets more potent. So every field-grown DEA confiscated plant in this country is sitting between 9% and 16% THC now. You can't buy the old stuff anymore. It doesn't exist. So the drug has gotten much more potent. And if you think people's brains are getting better exposed to more THC, right? It's one thing to lose 8 points of your IQ by the age of 35. You start losing 16 points or more, like you're becoming developmentally not functional at that stage of the game. So that is what the field-grown plants look like. This is what our kids actually know when they talk about marijuana, right? This is butter, shatter, glass, earwax. It's disgusting looking, right? If I found this in my kid's room, I'd be like, what the hell is that? I'd pick it up with some Kleenex and be like, that's gross. This stuff is the marijuana concentrate. So you take butane or another volatile gas and you pump it through the plant, you extract this stuff. And this is ranging between, 85%, 95% THC. This is the drug our kids are exposed to now. Right? Pretty unfamiliar stuff for a lot of us. So I think you guys know this. There's a gazillion ways now to use marijuana. The old days of a fat joint. I think if I put a fat rolled up joint in front of the average 16-year-old, they wouldn't even know what it was. But they know all of the stuff. The equipment is high tech. It's very fancy. It's able to vaporize it in a very effective way. So you can obviously smoke it or you could vape it. You can eat it in every food imaginable. It comes in beer and milk. It comes in spaghetti sauce. There's lots of ways. You can get it in a tincture, you can use it in a capsule, you can rub it on your skin as a cream. And when you look at the stores in Colorado, this is how they always sell their stuff. So this stuff is intended to target our kids. This is sugar-filled, look-alike candy bars. Each of those candy bars has 12 servings of marijuana. So the last time you shared a Kit Kat with 11 other people was never in your entire life, right? Never. And the likelihood of you buying your marijuana Kit Kat and breaking it up with 11 of your friends also seems really low to me. And so when the state of Massachusetts set out both the head of the state police and all the people in the legislature who were interested out to Colorado just to check out the scene, a lot of people went out there thinking this is all good, it's going to be good for tax revenue in Massachusetts. They came back pretty stunned saying, holy smokes, whatever we do, we can't have it looking like Colorado, right? That's the message they came back with. We passed a bill in November of 2016 that not just looks like Colorado, we basically gave the industry everything they wanted. So the cannabis committee just got put together 2 weeks ago, right? They just had their first meeting this morning. Is that right? I think that's what I heard. So they're going to be making the rules about what could be sold, how it could be packaged, maybe what the THC levels might be. I mean, if I were the goddess of Massachusetts, I would really limit the THC and I would not allow candy to be sold. This is targeted to kids. There's no other way around that. So I'm going to just skip a couple slides. People often say to me, but this is such a green industry. It grows in my backyard. It's all organic. It's all good. I'm like, this is not a green industry. This is an industry. These are people whose intention is to make billions of dollars the way that tobacco made billions of dollars on the health of a country. So again, what you do over the age of 25, I don't really care as long as you don't put anybody else in harm's way. But don't pretend that this is an environmental product. This stuff is a huge user of electricity and water. And when you look at the water shortage in California, there's multiple counties where really all the water is just going to growing marijuana. Okay, so I told you we're going to get tired of my marijuana talk, but you know what? This is what we're going to be facing for the next year or two or three, and I need people in this room to know what we're up against, because it's going to be a new, uncharted territory for every single one of us. Let's talk about alcohol. So 1/3 of us in this country drink absolutely zero. 1/3 of us drink very lightly, a couple drinks a week, a drink a month, not very much. And the final 1/3 of us drink all the rest of the alcohol, everything. And in fact, the final 10% of us drink on average 9 to 10 drinks a day. A lot, right? That's a lot of alcohol. So people often are like, no way do people drink 9 or 10 drinks a day, right? That's not possible, but absolutely it's possible. Because first of all, you got to remember what a drink is. It's 1 beer at 5% alcohol. It's 5 ounces of wine, and it's 1.5 ounces of hard liquor. So this is the latest group of women, of people struggling with alcohol, and that's women. We have never seen the shift towards any substance use disorder be this gendered this fast. So when I trained at the old Boston City Hospital back in the 1990s, in Boston City, did anybody train at Boston City or work there ever? Boston City is a pretty gritty hospital, right? Our job, we took care of people with alcohol and heroin use. That's what I got really good at. And we took care of a lot of drinkers, and I tell you, 90-something% of my drinkers were men. It was always a 9-to-1 ratio between men and women in alcoholism. And I'm not that old, meaning that this shift has occurred. It's now about 6-to-3 ratio between male and female alcoholics. And what's happened is that women are just drinking like fish. And, I count myself amongst these women who work really hard. Who in this room has a full-time job? And who wakes up wicked early to start. I'm cleaning up breakfast dishes and dinner dishes from yesterday first thing in the morning, and bringing the dog out and cleaning up a mess on the floor and packing lunches and yelling at people and waking people up and washing floors and doing other things, right? And then hauling off to work. And then you come home after a hard day at work, right? And what are you facing? You got to make dinner. You got to clean up the daytime mess that nobody bothered picking up after school. And then you're doing laundry, and you're checking emails, and you're checking Facebook. Women's lives, and I'm not trying to push men aside here, but women's lives involve a tremendous amount of work. And there's a very common pattern of coming home after a hard day's work and kicking back a couple something. It's very normal for a woman to come home and glug, 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 glug a big glass of wine. Every day I ask my patients, tell me about your relationship to alcohol. And women will say, I have a couple drinks at night. And I say, what are you drinking? I drink wine. What's in a glass? A couple drinks, right? Because we are drinking out of giant goblets, right? Mason jars on a stem. And I say to everybody, I need you to put 5 ounces in your wine glass and acknowledge that's a glass of wine. That's 1 glass of wine. And then I need you to pay attention to what you're really drinking. Because many of us go home and we're really drinking 3 to 4 to 6 to 9 glasses of wine. It's very easy to get there. And women are much more susceptible to the impact of alcohol. I'm now running a drug and alcohol detox, and I remain shocked at how many young female alcoholics walk in there who are in full delirium tremens, meaning they are very advanced alcohol and they're 26 years old. Never seen anything like it. So I'm never going to underplay the negative role that alcohol has in our society. It has a really significant one. What if every one of us came home from a terrible day at work and looked at our kids and said, man, I've had a terrible day. I'm going to go for a walk. You want to come with me? I hate my job and I really would like to quit it. Instead, I'm going to go sit down on the living room couch and I'm going to turn on, Headspace or a John Kabat-Zinn mindfulness meditation on my phone, because I have them on my phone. I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes and then I'll be more normal and I'll come hang out with you. Instead, a lot of us come home and we pop the top off a beer or we pour ourselves some liquor, and that's what our kids see. They learn that stress management and misery management is managed with booze. It's not a good lesson. This is a study that came out in 2000. I'm making this part up because I can't quite see my slide. I think it came out in 1997. It's from Kaiser, and it was a study based on 17,000 surveyed patients in San Diego County. And it was done for one specific reason, and it had results that nobody anticipated. So it asked 10 questions of adults reflecting on their childhood under the age of 18. And then they overlaid it on top of 50,000 Kaiser patients, just looking to see if there was any match. So these are the questions. I'm not going to read every one, but I don't think you guys can easily read them. I'm going to read some of them so you know what I'm talking about. Did a parent or another adult in your household, often or very often, swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically harmed? Did a parent or another adult in your household, often or very often, push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or you were injured? Were you sexually abused? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, support each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if needed? Were your parents separated or divorced? Did you watch your mother or stepmother be physically abused or verbally abused by a partner? Was there somebody in your household with major mental illness? Was there somebody in your household who was incarcerated? 10 questions, yes or no. This is a measure of household neglect, abuse, and dysfunction. And it is a measure, actually, of every chronic disease out there, that if you score a 6 or higher on an ACE study, that is what that study is called, you will die 20 years early. You will have much higher rates of heart attacks. If you score a 4 or higher, you're going to have multiple broken bones, 30 or more sexual partners. It defines every chronic disease out there with the exception of diabetes and strokes. And it's one of the largest predictors for who's going to develop an addiction and who's going to develop the disease or the syndrome of chronic pain. And I want you guys to pause on this one for a second. When you're a kid, first of all, let's pause for a minute and just think about why it is that our sympathetic adrenal system exists, right? Like you're out hiking in the woods 300 years ago, and all of a sudden a bear comes up on you, you're going to run, right? You get a spike in cortisol, your adrenals kick right in, adrenaline races through your system, you run to the cave, and you shelter in space, and you quiet down, right? That's the reason this system exists. The problem is when you're a little kid and you're living in a scary environment where you actually are hungry and you don't know where the next food is coming from, and you're worried about your younger sister who's being abused by an older stepbrother, and you're worried that somebody in your family might kill somebody that day, you're living in a fight or flight, cortisol-driven way of life 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It has a huge impact on your overall body and brain and organ development. And this, if we can do one thing as a society, which is to recognize and help keep our kids safe and help them live in loving, safe environments. Even if you can't do it yourself, you've got to surround our kids with loving adults. It's one of the reasons our schools matter so much, is our teachers and our administrators do a great job of creating often a very safe, loving environment for kids who come from homes that are not like that. This has a very specific look in our schools, right? These kids are heavily traumatized. They tend to be very reactive. They tend to be very impulse-driven. They tend not to be able to sit still. What does that look like? It looks like ADD. These kids don't have ADD, they're traumatized kids. And giving them drugs like stimulants does not help their trauma. They need trauma treatment. So 3 things that are going to get you in trouble: genetics, trauma, and early use. And what I say to you as parents and people who are teaching our kids is to talk to your kids early and talk to them often. And the message is to delay your use as long as possible. Delay, delay, delay. So again, our kids are making great decisions. The one exception to that is e-cigarettes. So we see more kids vaping in the last 4 years than we've ever seen before. And the problem with this vaping stuff is that kids will say to me, it's just flavored. It's just like cotton candy flavored stuff. And I'm like, you don't know what's in that. You have no clue. That was manufactured in China. It is unregulated at this point. So whatever it is that you think you just bought at the gas station that you're inhaling into your perfect lungs, which I know is at least formaldehyde, you do not know if it has nicotine in it, because we have no easy way to regulate this stuff and monitor it. And while this stuff is on the market and being targeted to kids, because truckers are not vaping cotton candy flavored things, those are targeting our kids, we create a generation actually truly addicted to nicotine that we didn't mean to happen. I'm going to pause on this slide. I've added a few slides this talk, but I do think it's important to acknowledge what I think many of us as parents would agree, which is that a lot of our kids are addicted to their devices. Does anybody have a kid they think actually is addicted to their device, right? Compulsive use, continued use despite harm. They cannot stop thinking about it, right? This I generation that we're raising right now, kids being born in 1995 to present day, I don't know what we don't know about this generation, but it's pretty worrisome. There's an upside. There's only one upside that I know of. We actually see the rates of other addiction is falling in this category, including to opiates in this generation, because we think they're so addicted to their iPhone and they're so busy getting likes and WhatsApp things and things that are feeding that dopamine in their system that they're not turning to other drugs. I don't know, is that an upside? I guess so. I just would really like my kid to be addicted to hiking and walking the dog and doing the dishes or something more positive. And instead, for those of us parenting this age, man, is it hard, right? Is this hard dealing with these devices? Has everybody else figured it out and I haven't? Do you guys fight with your kids about this stuff? How much screen time they have? Don't you wish you just had a switch and you could just turn it on and off and there was like an hour and a half a day they were allowed and otherwise it got shut down? But it doesn't work that way, does it? So this is a new world that we are heading into. And this is just a great article that came out 2 weeks ago in the Atlantic Monthly. And so this is in my slide deck, but it's worth Googling this article because I read it and it changed my way I managed my kids' devices. Okay, so I got into the opiate world in 2012. Every morning I wake up and I grab the newspaper and I walk the dog and I walk down the street reading the newspaper, and the first thing I read every morning is the obituaries. Not because I'm morbid, but because I'm a local family doctor in a small part of the world like this, and I take care of a lot of old people who are dying. And so every morning I need to know who died last night. I need to fill out a death certificate, I need to call the family. So starting in about 2010, I began noticing a lot of young people dying unexpectedly at home. I've been an addiction person for a while, so I thought I knew what that was. 2012, I opened the obituaries to find that picture of that young girl in the red jacket in the top left. And it said Ashley Sims, age 21, died of a heroin overdose in her bathroom at home. And I thought, I know Ashley. I know her grandmothers who I've taken care of. And I called them right away to tell them how heartsick I was about Ashley's death, but also to thank them for telling the truth about how Ashley had died, because it was the first time the paper began really understanding what it was that was killing so many young people. And those two grandmothers went to our little newspaper, the Greenfield Recorder, and said, you have got to start telling the story. So day after day after day, for years, they cover the opiate epidemic, and they cover it hugely. And I tell you, this region, Franklin County, we know a lot about this subject. We've been at it for a while. We're not behind this game. Sometimes I do think we're behind, but there's a lot of conversation about it. Organizations like Learn to Cope, Scott Early's office, they do a marvelous job of getting the information out there and making people understand that you're not alone when it comes to this problem. It's very hard to find any family who's not been touched by this. There's no doubt in my mind that pills were originally on the hook for that. I never deny that. When you look at how many prescription opiates this country prescribes in comparison to every other country out there, there's no doubt that we're over the top. You think they don't have chronic pain syndrome in Holland and Spain and Italy? They do. This is looking at opiate overdose deaths that, in comparison to other causes of death in young people. So it was just in the last 2 years where death by opiates surpassed motor vehicle accidents, HIV death rates at the peak of the HIV epidemic. We've long surpassed that. It's long surpassed gun violence. So and this problem with this chart is it continues to grow. This is the first quarter in years that we actually have had a plateau in Massachusetts in terms of death. Just this most recent quarter, because every other quarter has been higher. So when you compared in the years 2000 to 2010, this is a chart that I like to spend a minute on because I think it's interesting public health work, but it shows where people died and where people lived longer. So the negative numbers coming this way towards me is where we had a reduction in death. So there was a reduction in death by 34% from a rupture of an aorta, which is the big vessel going down your belly. Why did we have a decrease in aortic aneurysm death? Anybody know? Are you in medicine? Who said that? Are you medical at all? Because it's a great medical answer, right? Because those of us who are doctors think there's something we do that makes a difference. It is not technology. It's not the fact that I screen everybody over the age of 60 who used to smoke and is male. It's because we reduce tobacco. When you stop smoking, you're less likely to have an aneurysm that ruptures. So that's a public health measure, right? Why do we have a 23% reduction in flu and pneumonia? Shots. We vaccinate people. Why do we have a 22% reduction in motor vehicle accidents? Seatbelts, safer cars and seatbelts, that's exactly right. So these are all public health measures that change outcomes, right? That's what that lower part is. And then you look at the top, and that 10-year span of time, people were dying at high rates from a variety of things. But look at some of those things, like chronic lower respiratory disease, pneumonia, end-stage kidney disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. Do we have an epidemic of those things? No. Why are people dying of those things? Because they're unbelievably old, and eventually you're gonna die. And eventually I'm the one left filling out your death certificate. You haven't known who I was for 12 years, right? And I sit there and I stare at that death certificate and think she was 97 years old. What killed her? I don't get to write down old age, my friends. That's not allowed to go on a death certificate, although that is what killed her. At the end of the day, she stopped eating, she had Alzheimer's disease, I've got to write down something. So we do not have truly an epidemic of those, it's just that we're all getting unbelievably old. But you look at that top bar graph of death by opiate overdose at 276%. That bar is off the wall, out the door. It's probably in the outside of this building now in terms of its prevalence, in terms of a public health measure. Right? This is how many people are dying from death from opiates. This is the country. You could see it in 2003. Those dark red areas are places where people are dying of drug overdoses, and you just watch it spread throughout the entire country. Originally, back in maybe the year 2000 to 2010, most of the pills that came up the eastern seaboard came from Florida. It was a known place for lots and lots of pill mills. There were 600 pill mills in Florida that were closed down. There was this whole tourist destination of let's go from Kentucky or Maine or Western Mass, get a free ride on a bus and a free hotel stay and all your meals paid for, and you can go to Florida and just go to these pill mills and get bags of pills and prescriptions. And all of those pills and prescriptions would go to some dealer and they would just distribute them on the streets of Kentucky and Tennessee. And in 2009 and 2010, the federal government said to the state of Florida, if you don't stop this practice of having pill mills with cash for pill businesses that are coming straight up the Oxy Highway, known as I-95, we're gonna cut off all federal funding. We're gonna close down your airports. We're gonna stop federal funding for your public schools. At that point, Florida paid some attention and said, ooh, we appear to need to stop this. So they closed down most of their pill mills. They sent 34 American licensed, mainly American trained doctors to jail because they were not doctors, they were drug dealers. The problem is you shut down all of that source of pills, what were you left with? Yeah, 2010, that's when we started it. 2010, 2011. The pill mills get shut down and you're left with really unbelievably pure heroin on the streets everywhere. So when you ask emergency medical responders what their number one drug of concern is, those dark green areas, the answer is heroin. It always surprises me, why doesn't the Southeast light up? That was part of the I-95 corridor. Why don't they have a problem? And the answer is people are still prescribing, in many states, huge amounts of prescription opiates. So Massachusetts has never been a big opiate prescriber. Even at the peak, we were like number 41 in terms of opiate prescribing. And lots of the other countries still have doctors who prescribe thousands and thousands of opiate prescriptions every day. That is what is on the streets. So when you look at us and say, what's our number one problem? That red area, the answer is heroin. But if you can imagine, as we begin to close in on prescribing practices around the country, those dark purple areas will all be red. And the problem is that, yeah, we haven't peaked quite yet in Massachusetts. I always think we have. We haven't quite gotten there, I don't think. But guess what? The rest of the country hasn't even begun it yet, right? And wouldn't you want to think that the fine states of Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama are having forums like this at night and building methadone clinics and running Learn to Cope everywhere and talking to people about the public health tsunami that's about to hit them? That's not happening in those states. They're not prepared for what's about to hit them. We're going to lose hundreds of thousands, 250,000, 500,000 people to opiate overdose death in the next 10 years, mainly in the South. That's my prediction. Opiate deaths in 2015, this was just a new graph I just threw in, but those are the peak states: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Is that Kentucky? The other state there? Okay. Look at where the deaths really start, though, right? 2016 is when you start to see drug seizures for the first time showing fentanyl. So can you die of an overdose of prescription opiates? You can. You have to take quite a bit, but that's not really what kills people. It's heroin, and then heroin contaminated with fentanyl and carfentanil. That's when the deaths really began to spike. This stuff is all manufactured in a lab in China or in India or some parts of South America, and it gets FedEx to us, right? It just comes in through the U.S. Postal Service. It's really easy to get. So what happens to our kids? So first of all, when do our kids potentially get exposed to an opiate? They get injured, right? They get a football injury, they're a girl soccer player, and they have an ACL tear. They get their wisdom teeth out, they get their appendix out. The truth is, for everybody here who's raising a teenager, you're going to work really hard to make sure they don't get exposed to prescription opioids. Now, 5 years ago, I think most people were like, wisdom teeth. I don't know. Who's had somebody with a wisdom teeth out, and how much were you prescribed opiates? 30. Did that happen in the last year? No. How long ago? Roughly. Oh, 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, somebody in her family had a wisdom tooth removed, and she was given 30 of something, Vicodin or Percocet. 6 years ago, and you got 20. Anybody have any dental work done this year? And what did you get? My daughters had their wisdom tooth out, and they got 6. Awesome, right? And I'm going to argue that they could have maybe gotten potentially 0. Did they use all 6? Her answer was she was given 6 and she refused to let her daughters have them, and she mixed it with kitty litter and threw it out. Holy smokes, I'm loving that mom right there, babe. So the truth is, prescribing practices have gotten better. Here, okay, we can say that. It's gone down. Most of us who have had dental surgery, and when my kid had massive oral surgery, I did what you did. I was like, dude, you can't even imagine. He knew who I was, the oral surgeon, and he was like, his hand was shaking above the prescription pad. And I was like, don't even bother. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to fill it. Don't do it. And what did I do? I did what you did. Tylenol, Motrin distraction, right? Within a day and a half, she was fine. She cried a little bit, but she was fine. So my point is, limit the exposure to opiates as much as you can. You have a kid who has cancer, you're giving them opiates. There's no question in my mind. They have bone metastases. That's not what we're talking about here. But for a fairly mild surgical procedure, really, don't get your kids on opiates if you can help it. And Tylenol plus Motrin in conjunction work as well as a 5 milligram oxycodone. So talk to your person who takes care of you and say, what can I do to help with pain management that doesn't involve opiates, please? And they should give you a good answer. So things at home, I steal all of the stuff from Learn to Cope because these people know what they're talking about. Things that you might see at home is on this list, but really I actually look at my kids' room for worrisome behavior. So I don't clean their room, I don't do their laundry, I actually usually walk in their room and yell at everybody, but I do walk through their room on a routine basis and I go through things to look for anything that seems concerning to me. So this is a grouping of things that parents say to me, God, I wish I had known, and that's what parents at Learn to Cope say too. So do you guys know what Learn to Cope is? Learn to Cope is a peer-to-peer support group for family members, parents, and siblings and other things of people struggling with addiction. It really got going with the opiate problem, and you have a meeting here at Haywood Hospital on Tuesday night, and the man who runs it is he here? I think he had to leave, but oh, he's in the back. Yeah, awesome. So and Learn to Cope is an amazing, amazing resource for people. So if you found, little tiny baggies with dust in it, that is a problem. If I find Benadryl in my kids' room or Tylenol, I freak out on them. They know they're not allowed to have any medicine in their room. If they have a medical problem, a headache, their knee hurts, they're going to come talk to their mother or their father. They should not be self-administering any medicine. Seriously, until they're out of your house, you should control all of that stuff. Burnt foil? Give me any reason why burnt foil's in your house. Anybody? Right? You had a baked potato roast in the middle of the summer. That's it. Nothing else in your backyard barbecue. There's no burnt foil in your house. That's somebody who's cooking down drugs. A bent spoon. I actually freak out when I find straws in my kids' room. I don't yell at them, but they know I don't like it. I don't like straws. I think they're unenvironmental. But for me, finding a straw in your kids' room, the first thing I think of is they're up to no good. So my point is, you've got to pay attention to your kids. When I have a parent bring in a kid, I say to them, you got to go through the room and get rid of everything. And they come back with these huge eyes, and I'm like, yep, what'd you find? And they're horrified. They have no idea. Their kid's been shooting heroin under their own roof for a couple years, and they didn't know. And they always say to me, I just wish I knew what to have looked for. It would have helped so much. So you guys know all about naloxone, also called Narcan, which is the drug reversal drug. This is an old slide because this is an old message. If you have somebody you love you're worried about an opiate problem, you need to have Narcan on you, right? It's in my purse, it's in my car. We have people, officers, it's in the school. The school nurses have it, right? That wasn't true 4 years ago, right? The school nurses made it all happen so that really nearly every public school in Massachusetts has Narcan. It didn't come from the legislature. DPH didn't mandate it. The school nurses got together and said, if I have 14,000 EpiPens in my school and I can't save one kid or staff member from an overdose, that's unacceptable. So we wrote up an order and we shipped it out to everybody and everybody got it. So this is without a prescription at every Walgreens and CVS and many other pharmacies. You can walk in and say, I need Narcan. They don't have to ask you why or who you're using. It's none of their business and it gets covered by your insurance. These are great books on addiction that I've loved over the years. I've read some of them several times. Who's read any of these books? What have you read? Beautiful Boy. Oh my God. For parents, Beautiful Boy is an unbearably powerful book. I cried and cried when I read that book. It's a great, beautifully written book. And so he also wrote the book called Clean, which is that blue one that just talks about failed drug and alcohol treatment in our country and how it can get better. These are awesome books. So this is my website. I asked my kid to build me a website because I couldn't handle my volume of requests that I'm terrible on email if anybody knows me. So I have a website, which is my name, ruthpotee.com, and it has all my slide decks on them, or a lot of them. It has some videos. It has some different, I give talks now to like courthouses and judges and probation officers. I try to influence change in some way or another. So it's a resource for people who want to know more. You guys have been a lovely audience. Thanks for letting me be here. Have a good night.